Your jump to freelance starts here. Welcome to the Jump Moment.
Sometimes success is less about the skills themselves and more about helping other people understand them. Today on the podcast, I'm having a conversation with Todd Linder. Todd runs a business called LaunchPoint, where he helps ministry leaders transition into marketplace. There's something really profound about the work that Todd is doing to me, partly because I worked alongside a lot of ministry leaders over the years, and one of the things I actually heard often was, I can never leave ministry because my skills don't translate. Todd helps those skills translate. While you may not think of Todd's business as creative, there's actually a lot in this that is critical for us to find success as creative freelancers. At no point in my time serving clients have they asked me how proficient I am at Adobe Illustrator. No, they just need a logo. They just need a campaign that will help them move the needle. They just need a solution. That was one of the things that Todd brought up is businesses and clients are looking for solutions. So how do we translate what we do into a language that they understand? So much of this is why the Jump to Freelance group exists on School. But for today's resource, I actually want to highlight the book and really the authors that Todd mentioned in our conversation. There's a book called 10X is Easier Than 2X. It's by Dan Sullivan with Dr. Benjamin Hardy. There's a couple other books that Todd mentioned. I'm going to put links to all of them in the description. When Todd brought these up, he was bringing them up in the context of the importance of thinking differently about the way that you're solving problems. So these are fantastic reads, and they're absolutely worth your time and energy if you're considering making the jump to prepare yourself to begin thinking differently. Towards the end of the episode, Todd shares some excellent advice when it comes to getting started as a freelancer. I hope you enjoy the conversation with Todd as much as I did. Todd, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about just your transition from what you were doing to what you are doing. You're not purely in the creative space, but there's so much attention and energy that you put into this idea of transitioning from one type of role to another. And at the end of the day, the jump to freelance is just that. It's moving from one type of role to another. So I'm very excited to have this conversation. Really appreciate the stuff that you do on LinkedIn. I've learned a lot and benefited a lot from it. I always love starting these conversations at the same place. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now in your business.
Yeah. So thanks for having me on, by the way, Matt. It's fun to get to see you on LinkedIn as well. So I help people who are in ministry or previously in ministry. So that would be specifically churches, parachurch organizations, nonprofits that are religious, generally of the Christian stream. Because that's my background. So help people that are in those spaces that want to transition into the marketplace, help make that jump. So you can call me a career coach, a career consultant, whatever you want, but help them specialize doing that. And specifically to identify what they want to do, how to translate their non-traditional background into words and phrases that hiring managers who would have no clue what they've done before, but understand how to network, all that stuff, even how to negotiate their offer, because that's a completely foreign concept for somebody who comes from a serving not-for-profit mentality like that. Yeah. So all the normal stuff in the business world, but
yeah,
not
that's
normal.
Great. So that translation stuff's really interesting to me because there is a very specific skill set that you build over time in nonprofit space or church space, ministry space. And so you're not just like a search firm where you're like, hey, I found this job listing, but you're like helping people translate and kind of understand how they can fit in a role. Is that fair?
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of that comes from, you have to understand that when a company is hiring, and this may not be super relevant for your audience, but when a company is hiring, but maybe it would be, because when a company is paying you as a freelancer, what they're not looking for is what you can do. What they're looking for is what problem you can solve for them, right? So they're in a boardroom somewhere and they're saying, man, our numbers are down. And then someone says, well, I saw somebody post on LinkedIn that we need to be doing more social selling, or we need to redo our brand. So then they're going to go down that rabbit trail and then they're going to start looking for branding experts, and then they might come across you as a freelancer, as a contractor, and they're going to be a lot less worried about like what you can do, and more of how you solve their problem. And so ultimately, if it's a money problem because no one understands what you do, well, yes, you also have a branding problem, but really you have like a money problem, as in no one knows what they need to pay you for. And it's the same thing when you're trying to translate your experience to apply for a job. Because if you have a non-traditional background and you're like, well, I stood in front of people for 25 years and told them how to live their life according to some ancient text. The guy in the hiring conversation is like, what? Like, how did you even get this far in our process? And like with the job I actually got, when I sat down in the interview process with the hiring manager, literally the first words he said to me, he looked at my resume, he looked up at me, he looked at my resume again, and then he looked up at me and he said, Todd, your experience is confusing.
Oh, wow.
It's like, that's how you want to start it.
Yeah, great. This sounds like a good start.
I think I got hired because I was the only candidate that wasn't like either a weirdo or 22. Yeah. I was like, well, this guy at least knows how to work, so let's try it. But I didn't know how to explain why my skills, my background, my experience could solve their problem, even though I could, but I didn't know how to explain it. And so that's a lot of what the translation piece is for us.
That's great. Yeah, and that, I mean, you're right on the money when you say that this matters for freelancers, because to hire somebody to rebrand your organization, nobody has ever asked me, do you know how to use Adobe Illustrator? Like, nobody cares what tools they don't even know what tools I use.
You could use it in Canva.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like, no one is asking that question. They're saying, and I actually had this last year, I did a rebrand for a solar company of all things. And the question that they asked me, it had nothing to do with the tools that I use, the color palette, am I using Pantone or not? Like, they don't even know. Their question is, why should we give you money to change our logo? We've been in business for 20 years. We're pulling in however many million per year. Why does this matter at all? Essentially, I have to justify the solution to this problem. And if I can't translate it, I'm not getting that project or that job. So 100% that translation stuff is super important. So being in that space, you'd mentioned having an interview with a background in ministry. What were you doing before your kind of your jump?
There was one stopping point from ministry, then in corporate, and now to what I'm doing. Yeah. And so when I was working for a church, it's a pretty big church out of Atlanta, which is where I am right now. And I was tasked as a 23-year-old to start their residency and their intern program, which is very common for larger churches and even some smaller churches, because a lot of times you have people in Bible colleges or seminaries who are trying to figure out if they want to become pastors. And so my job was, the lead pastor came to me, and I had been a contractor, basically just doing grunt work for 8 months or so at the church. And the lead pastor came to me and said, here's what I want to happen. I want you to find people who fit our culture, who are going to do everything that we need to get done. And then I want you to spend 2 to 3 hours a week making sure that they get some personal, professional, leadership, spiritual development time. And that was all the direction I got. Wow. And so I started the residency and internship programs. I did that for about 7 years. Oh, wow. And then from there, ended up transitioning out of that role. But I mean, most of the work I was doing was around just like meeting with just out of college kids, and like, hey, you probably like don't say bro in that meeting. Like, don't dap up your boss. unless they like lead it, like please use capitalization, like please capitalize the first word, like just dumb stuff, but all stuff that we need to learn when we were 21, 22, going into the workforce. So I jumped from there into an HR role, and I was an HR generalist, had some HR business partner type of responsibilities. So my role really was split into two things. One was doing what HR generalists do, which is just a lot of like clicking around in Salesforce and Workday and making sure you're hiring people and interviews and reading resumes and things like that. And then the other half of my job was consulting the business leaders on their people strategy, on their hiring strategies, but also what they needed, why they needed those things, how it aligned with their budget, and also some conflict resolution stuff and culture fit. And then, so I did that and absolutely hated the job. Hated the job. And I didn't really know why, because I loved the company. I loved the culture. I loved what they were about. CEO was amazing. COO was amazing. Like my team was amazing. Everything should have been amazing. And I absolutely hated my job. And I did not understand why. But there were like snippets of my job that I really enjoyed. And they were all around coaching. It's all around helping people to figure out basically what the problem was. They were experiencing some dissonance in the workplace for whatever reason that was, figuring out what that problem was, and then helping them to come to a solution. So coaching, consulting, kind of a mix of those two things. Yeah. And I did that for probably close to 2 years, and then COVID hit and everybody and their mom got laid off, including myself.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where the conversation goes, is like, was there a trigger, a specific thing that kind of catapulted you into doing your own thing? Sounds like yes, layoffs. Kind of before that, the layoff thing is so interesting to me, because to be laid off is a circumstance and like it's a catalytic moment, but to then start your own thing, that's not always the response people have when they're laid off. So is freelancing something, or building your own business, has that always been something in the back of your mind that I really want to do this someday? Or is it sort of like the door that just seemed the most probable to open? What did that look like for you?
Yes. So yes to both of those. And I think the scenario we found ourselves in during 2020, specifically like the first half of 2020 into Q3, I think is so unique. And so I don't necessarily recommend people do it the way that I did it. So that's like a disclaimer, because the scenario is so unique. So half of my job was reading resumes and consulting leaders and doing interviews and all that stuff. And when everyone got laid off, I just started helping people with their, like, thinking about what's next, because people were calling me. Like, apparently I was the career guy. I didn't even know I was the career guy. But people started calling me and saying, hey, like, can you help me? Like, friends of friends would call me. And I'm like, I don't have your number. Who are you? And they're like, well, Jimmy told me to call you. I'm like, cool. And I think, like, a lot of times as someone, when you're starting your own business and there's some sort of freelancing, when people start coming to you for advice, or people start coming to you for like side projects, it's worth paying attention to, because you're seen as an expert. Yeah. And the definition of expert that I love is just that you're better at it than the next person, or the person that's asking the question. You just need to be like 1% better, and you are more of an expert on a scale than they are. And so apparently I was just the expert. I was more of an expert than they were. And the light bulb moment for me was when a couple people offered me money for my time. And so I was just doing this for free, because, like, it's COVID, I'm laid off, I don't have anything to do right now. The government was paying my salary. And so I just was like, oh, well, this is interesting. And my wife and I, we did not have kids at the time, which is a whole nother factor of, like, she got to keep her job, and she had some pretty good job security. during that time. She worked in interior design. And if you remember back during that time, like interest rates just plummeted and everyone's super bored. Yeah. And so everyone's at home and they're looking around and they're like, I don't really like the way the living feels. And interest rates are lower. Yeah. So, and the interior design industry and for a couple years, it just skyrocketed. And so my wife worked for an interior design firm running operations for them. And so she had great job security because everyone hated how their house looked and decided to do something about it.
Yeah. Well, because they've never tried to run their full-time job out of it like they now had to, Definitely.
And their kids were gone. Yeah. Like kids were at school.
Yep.
They're in the office. And so your house sits empty for the majority of the day. And now it's full for the majority of the day. You're like, well, this functionally doesn't really do it for us. So we just were like, government's paying my salary or some of it. Let's just try. Let's just do it. So we had the freedom to do that for a year, right? Wow. And that's why I say it's such a unique environment to just jump and just go straight into starting something when I didn't really have a client base or even know what kind of coaching I wanted to do. So don't recommend it for that reason. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but for me personally, especially in coaching, there's a lot of creativity in what I do, but I'm not like sitting my computer on Illustrator or something like that all day long, or building websites or something.
No.
On the flip side, my dad was an entrepreneur. His dad was an entrepreneur. So it's kind of in my blood. I grew up on it, like uncertainty in terms of like, you got to get the work done and you got to figure it out. Like that was super normal to me. I didn't grow up in a home where it was like my dad and my mom worked corporate jobs. So I think it was kind of in my blood that risk tolerance was really, really high. And I wanted to start something. I love having freedom of schedule. Yeah. If any of my former bosses heard me say this, they would laugh and nod in agreement. When there is something that's happening that's really stupid or a waste of time or inefficient, I'm just like, why are we working on this? What are we doing here? This is so dumb. Yeah. And so if there's a better way, I want to do it that way. And a lot of times I'd just get shut down. And so it's like, well, I just want to do it my way. I'm a little bit of a rebel. I just want to do it my way. And so it was kind of inevitable that was going to happen at some point. That just happened to be the jump moment.
Yeah, that's great. I laughed because there was a stretch of time where every year when we had an annual retreat, I would legitimately go home and think to myself, okay, how much time do I have to find another job? Do I start something? Do I and it was the same kind of thing. The root of it was, I know I'm not going to enjoy this 48-hour period. Like, I'm not a student ministries guy. I don't love, seeing how far I can throw the Twinkie to win a prize. Like, that's just not something that brings me great joy in life. And also I'm busy, so I have work to, you know what I mean? So it's like I'm trying to fabricate all of these circumstances. I'm like, what if I break one of my cars? Like, is that enough of a reason? And then it's like, if I burn the house down, that's probably too far. So I mean, I feel it. I feel that. That's great. So it sounds like that, at least that risk tolerance is there. Was this the kind of thing where you're like, I want to, but I shouldn't? Like, was there a fear of kind of making that jump, or did it just sort of seem like kind of naturally flowed with the circumstances?
Oh, I've been wanting to make it for a long time. My wife has very much lower risk tolerance than I do.
Yeah.
Her dad's a financial advisor.
Oh yeah.
She grew up in the suburbs. Nothing against growing up in the suburbs, but I grew up in the city. It's just a little bit grittier. And my dad was very successful, so it's not like I grew up in like a bad part of town. It's just, I think, a little bit of a different experience.
Yeah, different pace for sure.
So it took a little while to convince her that this was a good idea. And the stipulations were, I was getting my master's degree at the time in organizational leadership, which did absolutely nothing for my career, but I learned a lot.
Yeah.
It was a great program. It was truly an amazing program. Not really that traditional in terms of like what you would experience in a normal master's program. I actually wrote my master's thesis on why school is so dumb for real life and for a real career, and I got an A. Because it's like kind of to prove the point. I just followed all of the, and people who are creatives on here will be like, yeah, school's dumb, and it's true, because I followed like the correct Chicago formatting and all that stuff, and I got an A because I did the work the right way, even though my argument was this is literally going to do nothing for me, which kind of was true. But I had to finish my master's degree was one thing, and then just look through some of our finances. And we had been very diligent about saving. And so we were able to kind of project out like, where do we need to be, by when? And finally she was like, okay, we'll try for this long. And see if we can make it work. So it was, she was very, very gracious in that process because it was a big risk for her. And for me, and I do like talking about this, I won't talk about it for too long, but for me, it was like the obvious next step. For all the goals we'd ever talked about in our life, for wanting to have free time with our kids, for wanting to have unlimited earning potential, to be able to travel, like all the stuff that being a business owner allows you to potentially do, right? I was like, well, this is the way. And she definitely took a big risk on me, which I'm grateful for. And it's paying off now.
No, absolutely.
But she took a big risk on it for sure. And it was a process, and I had to be very patient because she didn't see it. And I think I probably could have been more patient rather than her speeding it up. I should have, looking back, worked on her timeline and honored what she needed rather than pushing as hard as I did. I think we would have ended up in the same place, but with maybe a little less pain and discord.
Fewer bumps.
Sure.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting piece of this equation. You know, I think when you're doing your own thing, you know, you're single guy, single gal. This is what I want to be doing. And in a sense, it's like I'm just going to roll my dice. But when you're making this decision, making the jump to freelance, you're rolling other people's dice along with you. And I mean, because your story is very similar. I didn't get laid off, but a lot of the similar factors. I also challenged my academic friends in college by showing how ridiculous the whole system was in my own way. But also my wife's health situation really put me in a position where I felt like the best way that I could care for my family was to actually have a job that provided insurance. And so that was the catalyst for us to say, this is the first time that insurance makes sense not on the company dime. And that was sort of what catapulted us. But there's a real interesting layer for anybody who isn't just a solo person, solopreneur, kind of has the dream. I think there's this kind of the Hollywood story of like, no, I just did it anyway. And then I was proven right. And then everybody was pumped that I was right. But like, it's such a relationally damaging way to go about it. What was helpful for you in walking alongside your wife as she has a lower risk tolerance? Because those of us who have a high risk tolerance, we are willing to, the dice are in our hand, we are shaking them, we are ready to go. But when someone else isn't, any practical advice that you have to kind of maybe be more patient, if that makes sense?
Yeah. One of the hard things about it, and as a career coach, I like hear this all the time. One of the hard things is that tension of both, I'm not where I want to be, like future, and I'm not where I want to be present. And I don't see a way out of where I am presently to get to that future except this singular pathway, which probably is like 90% correct. Is the vision that you have can only be achieved in certain ways. And one of the things that I realized is I spent a lot more time researching this and processing this individually than my wife had. And so I was bought in like years before we actually made that jump. But the conversations did not start until probably a few, like 6 to 7 months before. I think COVID really accelerated it. Getting laid off accelerated it. Having government pay a percentage of my salary accelerated it. So there was still some buffer that was happening there. But there was still like, I think that I just needed to really understand that I had done all this research and all this processing solo. And I needed to do the same amount while with her without actually like trying to convince her of saying, hey, this is what I'm learning. What do you think? Step back, be quiet, process from a neutral standpoint and try to really understand where she's coming from. And I think I tried to do more convincing than like actually just listening and caring, just to be like brutally honest against myself, actually caring about what her needs were. Yeah. And some of those needs were, I don't want to disappoint people and I want to feel safe and I want to feel secure and I have my own dreams and I don't know if this lines up with those dreams and I want to start a family. So what does that look like bringing kids into the world? And I think looking back, I could have done a better job of just saying, here's what I'm processing. What do you think? And then if it was different than what I thought, not being like, oh, well, here's what else I found. Like, prove your point wrong. But like chewing on it. Because my wife is like incredibly wise and most of what she thinks is correct. And I don't say that in like a joking way, like, you know, husband's the head, wife's the neck, right? Yeah. Like, just turns wherever you want to go. Like, she's legitimately incredibly wise and incredibly brilliant. And most of the way she sees the world is so clear and so intelligent. And usually the results end up being pretty spot on. She's got a good radar. And I just wish that I had acknowledged that in this process and really decided to like listen to her gut. Because ultimately we would get into business stuff later on once we actually had started. And I'd bring something to her and she's like, I don't know. I'm like, well, it's going to be awesome. You know, I feel like as entrepreneurs, we're always like a little unrealistically optimistic. And I wish I had gone back and I'm like, okay. Like, why are you saying the things that you're saying and been curious about them? So I don't know if I have any advice to like what I did correctly, what I did right, but more of what probably would have honestly expedited the process even more, because the first couple of years we're still gaining her trust. Even though we were doing it, it was more like, I'm doing this because I believe in you and I love you, but I'm still not sure. Yeah. I wish it was, because now it's the opposite. I'll be the one who's like, riding the emotional roller coaster, like, oh, this is never gonna work. Oh my gosh, we're gonna die. And she's like, are you kidding? Like, we're crushing it. Like, this is great. I love life. But oh, okay, good.
All right, yeah.
Yeah. Great. So I wish I had done that sooner.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's so much in that because, and that's part of why I wanted to just sort of get your thoughts on that, because there is so much that we're trying to carry. Like, it's almost like our optimism is trying to carry the momentum because we know it's going to be a lot of hard work. And so we have to believe. If we don't believe, oh boy, like I'm not sure if I'm going to show up or not. Mm-hmm. And so you have to manufacture that on some level. But when other people are in the equation, there's so much more momentum when everyone has belief, as opposed to kind of another oppositional, conversation. And sometimes that just takes time. And so I appreciate that insight, because I think that's something that's really relatable really for anybody that has, honestly, even a steady girlfriend or boyfriend, like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to be married, you don't have to have kids. Like, anybody who has relationships in life, there's going to be a potential tension that emerges when this is the path, because this is a pretty contrarian path relative to what you'd hear in most contexts. You know, there's a lot of freelancers out there, so it's not like it's, you know, it's not like having a potato farm or something. I'm sure there's a lot of those too. I don't know. I don't offend my potato farmer audience, but at the end of the day, like, having more people bought into that mission or that vision that you have with you, it's worth the investment, especially when it's those people that are close to you. It's going to be relationships where people don't get it. Fine. They can move on, or, you know, whatever. You can send them text messages when you're waking up at 11:30 in the morning. How's the first half of your day? Because I slept in because I can, you know, but ultimately, those people who are close to you, giving them the space and the margin to be able to kind of partner with you on the journey. Something really, really big about that. That's great.
And this is, let me just insert here, Matt. This is why it's so important what you're doing with your community and with your group. Because as an example, like, as you were thinking, I have a buddy who's a YouTuber. I actually have a couple buddies who are YouTubers. One is like kind of starting out, probably like 3 years into it. He's about to hit 1 million subscribers, which is amazing. That's awesome. Yeah. Awesome. And he's had like a lot of the big names. He's been in their videos, and he used to live in Atlanta, and he moved out to LA. And being a YouTuber in Atlanta is super weird. Yeah. Being a YouTuber in LA, super normal. Yeah. Right. And that normalcy catapulted his career, not just because it's like a hive mind of like all the best people. He told me he was on a retreat 2 weeks ago in Mexico, a YouTuber retreat, and Kevin Hart was the speaker. But the only reason you get into that room is because you're around other people who are being invited into that room, right? And so having a community even that you're a part of, like beyond the relationship with your spouse, having the community that you're a part of is super important. But then my other friends who are YouTubers, who I think they're like the 5th largest channel, they are married, and they started this when they were pre-dating, some of them dating when they were and they had to have those conversations like, hey, this is going to be our life. Like, are you signed on for this? Yeah. And they're incredibly successful, but a big part of it is because there's buy-in from all the people who are important. But they also surround themselves with really, really talented people in their space. So that's just great. Like when you talk about doing a community, we have a coaching group as well. It's online. It's like, you got to surround yourself with people who are trying to do the same thing together, because that's how you're going to really be successful in that. Yeah,
that's great. Well, I mean, a big part of this for me, when I started my business about 3 years ago, it's not Jump to Freelance. It's actually called Lunchtime Heroes. But when I first started, I had no idea what I was doing. Like, and worse than that, every conversation that I had started with, so what do you do? And then I say, I work with church creatives. And they say, I could never run my own business. That's terrifying. And probably, you know, like, of course, like, this is the helpful stat in that moment. You know, 90% of businesses fail after 2 hours or whatever, you know, whatever the stats are. I'm like, wow, thank you for that, I guess. Weird introduction. But I kept finding that the only people around me were ones that would remind me of how improbable what I was trying to do was. And I'm like, honestly, it's not really that like, every business that exists was in this place at some point. So to me, like, logically, I'm kind of defiant against it. But you can only be defiant for so long. And so, very fortunate, I got connected with a handful of other people who have businesses that serve churches. And that was an absolute game changer for me. And so as I continue to kind of move down that road, this is sort of the next iteration of that with Jump to Freelance. But all to your point, I'm just tired of people having conversations with everyone in their life who then say, this is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. Like, that's just not a helpful propeller for you in what you're trying to accomplish. And so, find a community, whether it's mine or whether it's somebody else's, if you're looking to transition from whatever you're doing, call Todd and get in a group that is going to be like-minded and moving in the same direction, because it's such a game changer. It saves you so much time, so much energy. And over time, ironically, it saves you so much money, because now you're not wasting your time pursuing all these other random things. So yeah, I mean, I agree. Obviously, I believe in it enough where I'm starting to build it, but yeah, I mean, I've just seen that in my own life as well, where it's really hard to pursue a dream if you don't have people around you that are also pursuing a dream. It doesn't even have to be the same one, but something, So yeah, that's great. So now that you've been at this for a little while, and really even kind of going through all these different ups and downs, things like that, what's something that you would go back and tell yourself, whether this be, right as you're trying to win the argument maybe, or even consider yourself like, let's do this thing, what's something that you see today with a little bit more clarity than you did in the past?
I'll say one practical thing and one more like personal. The practical thing I would say is focus on just finding that first person that you're going to sell to, get money from them. Doesn't actually matter even how much. Just get money from them by serving them in exchange for your services, and learn, like crush it, learn from there, and then do it again and just do it a little bit better and ask for a little bit more. And I mean, that's business on repeat, right? But in the beginning, I remember I was just doing generic career coaching at first. And man, career coaches are a dime a dozen out there. And I needed a niche, and I didn't really understand that, but I needed to like specifically serve a specific group of people, and it helped my story align with a bunch of people. And I didn't really even realize it, because I thought my story is unique. Turns out it's not at all.
What do you know?
So many levels. But the first person that signed up for my program literally signed up for less than 20% of what we charge right now. And they got so much more than current clients get. But I didn't know. Like, I didn't believe in myself. And I think that's a thing for creatives a lot of times. And I think it's a thing for new entrepreneurs is you doubt how much you're worth. But like, when something came through on Stripe, be it way less than it should have been, it was an unlock for me of like, this is possible. And it's addicting. And I want to do it again and again. And it also helped me overcome the fear of selling. And I think I did fear it for a while, and I didn't do it because of that. I think a really great resource for creatives on this is Chris Do. The Future. Everyone on your podcast has probably heard of him. But if you haven't, you need to go look this guy up, because he's the master when it comes to sales and for specifically with creatives. But that was really helpful for me. So from a practical standpoint, just like go do it and get money from somebody, and then you can figure out the next one, because that, like, going from 0 to 1 is an unlock in business. The other thing that I would say to myself, more personal, is just be kinder to yourself. Like, give yourself grace, celebrate where you've come from. It's a process. You want to be around doing this for the next 10, 20 years. Like, give yourself a break. If you don't make it big like the other 20 people you've seen post about on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever, you're actually not weird. Like, that's very normal. And just be kinder to yourself in the process, because it is a process. And I wish I had done that, and something I'm still working on right now. A really helpful book for me, or a series of books, I guess, are the books by Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. So Who, Not How, 10X is Easier Than 2X, The Gap in the Game. So the book, The Gap in the Game, is really like talking about that concept. And that's been helpful for me to just realize, like, when I look at where I wish I was and I'm not there, that's a recipe for burnout, for depression, and for self-sabotage. But if I look at where we've come from and see where I am now in comparison, that's a recipe for celebration and motivation and energy and creativity. And so just trying to do a lot more of that and be kinder to myself in the process.
That's such a tension with creatives, obviously, as well. But just in business, to look at where you aren't, and it's just the worst. It's the worst strategy that you can have. And so I love that. I love that shift of looking back at where you've come from and how much you have accomplished and how much you've done already. And that, coupled with the practical advice that you're saying, if you've gotten one client and you've gotten paid for it, you used to have 0 clients. Like, you used to have made no money. You have now made some money. Like, that's huge. Now, instead, if you say, well, I have 1, but I mean, I don't have 10. I mean, it's going to ruin your day. It's going to ruin your week, So great shift. I love it.
And that'll increase as you go. And you just got to give yourself time. I think we were looking at, my wife works with me, which is amazing.
That's awesome.
And we were looking at some numbers, and we were looking at 2024 versus 2023. We're like, I was down and like, oh, we should be here and I should be doing this and we should hire these people and blah. She's like, come here. And she pulls up her computer. She's like, let's just look at reality for a second here.
Yeah.
And we did 10 times revenue in 2024 than we did in 2023.
That's incredible.
Now, I say 10 times is like, that could be 1 to 10 million. It could be $1 to $10, right? Yeah. But it was still that idea of like, okay, it's not where like I want to be, but is it? Yes. Yeah. Like, the process is where I want to be right now. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like, you have 1 now. Now, welcome to the game. Yeah, welcome to the show. You're officially playing.
Yep.
If you have 0, you're not playing.
Yeah, that's right.
When you get 1, now you're in the arena.
Can't
now
multiply by 0. So not scalable. That's great.
It's true.
I love it. I love this conversation. It's always fun to me when I find these little glimpses of people who are like, oh, I didn't know others rebelled against academia while pursuing a degree. That's like, it makes me so happy. So these little nuggets are a joy for me. But really appreciate your insights. I love how you are so focused in this space of transition for people. I think so many creatives get locked up in that space, and not just creatives. I think that's the reality, is that humans get locked up in this point of indecision. So I love that you are helping kind of grease the skids a little bit to say, look, I can help guide you and navigate you toward that next thing. So thank you for that. Because I know, coming from a ministry background, there's a lot of people that feel stuck in ministry because they don't know how to transfer what they've learned, the skills they've developed, into something different. And that's brutal. That's a prison. And so I love that you are freeing people from just being stuck there. Not that everybody has to leave ministry, but that there is a way for people to make that transition. So very, very appreciative of the work that you're doing. And then just more practically, appreciate you taking time to have a conversation and just share your insights with this group of creatives who are hoping to make the jump to freelance. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Do it.
One of the things that Todd shared that I think is an incredibly practical takeaway for anyone listening: get your first client. It actually doesn't matter how much you're charging, just charge something. And it doesn't matter if you over provide for them. Just do something, serve them well, solve problems for them. And what you will find on the other side of that is you're in the game. You've started. You have made the jump to freelance. It may not be holistically what you think it should be or what it needs to be over time, but you've made the first step. So consider that my challenge to you. If you have not yet had any paid clients when it comes to freelancing, Identify one service that you can provide, find one person that you believe needs this service, and get going. Charge them something. But don't worry about pricing. Don't worry about maximizing profits. Don't worry about any of those types of details. Your goal here is to get off the starting blocks.
Thanks for listening to The Jump Moment. To find support for your jump to freelance, join our community at jumptofreelance.com.